Hey everybody, my name's Alex Hengstifer, and I'm here today with Tricia Light. She's a graduate student at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I also work at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I started this project because I wanted to be able to capture different people's journey and pathway to their careers, where they are today and where they're going to be going in the future. People have some really interesting stories, and you'll see hear a little bit more from Tricia and hear more about her interesting story. So right now I'll just throw it over to her to say hi and introduce herself.
Hi, thanks for the great introduction. So my name is Tricia. I am currently just wrapping up my second year as a PhD student studying marine chemistry and geochemistry with Dick Norris at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography here in sunny San Diego.
Yeah, it's quite sunny today. You'll notice we're both in our homes. It's July of 2020, and we are still working through this COVID-19 pandemic. So we are both currently working remotely and then also going into our labs when we can. So if you hear any background distraction noises, just, we are in our neighborhoods. Okay, so I guess my first question is, so where were you born and raised?
Yeah, so I grew up in Redondo Beach, California. It's a suburb, sort of beach town just outside of LA. So I totally grew up very much in love with the beach and the ocean. I later learned it's just I really love like outdoors and nature as a whole. But growing up for me, because of where I lived, like you don't really get nature except for the beach when you're like from like the LA area. So yeah, it was definitely very every single weekend I was playing beach volleyball and swimming and just starting to fall in love with that beautiful ocean right over there.
Yeah, it's a really awesome facet of living out here on the West Coast, especially when you can be so close to the coast. So what were your inspirations as a child? What did you, besides being outside, what were things that you liked to do that inspired you?
I really loved reading, and especially in terms of science. My grandmother actually was a chemist, so she was a chemist, got her undergraduate degree in chemistry at a time where not a lot of women were studying chemistry, and then worked in a lab. She like helped invent some different chemicals out there. And then once she had kids, when she had my dad, she started to work as a high school chemistry teacher. And then once she retired, she became an environmental activist and became really, really involved with things like birding and like working with the Audubon Society and forming parks, just doing all of these really incredible things. So growing up, I spent a ton of time with my grandmother. And she very not subtly wanted to make me into a little scientist. She could tell that I was interested in it. So I spent she would, I think maybe for my 7th birthday, she got me like a little kid's microscope for Hanukkah or something like that. And so like we would just, I would go over to her house after school and we would go to like a local salt marsh and I would look at the marsh insects and under the microscope and things like that. And just do all sorts of like, she was, a trained scientist. So she had like that background, that scientific background to be able to expose me to a lot of these things really, really young. So yeah, just from like, I wrote here, like I started telling people when I was 8 that I wanted to be an environmental scientist, just like, because I knew, obviously it was because I knew like it would be exciting to my grandmother, but also I was just like really into it. And that was like always what I wanted to do, was just reading and playing outside and studying things.
Wow, such an awesome inspiration. I feel like a lot of us didn't have somebody like that. So you learn so much at such an early age. And also a woman who has advanced degrees in science. That's really quite astonishing, especially, further back in our history.
Yeah, I was so incredibly lucky. And I have like, it was so formative for me. And I feel like I have such a direct line back to like, well, I know exactly why I decided to be a scientist, because like when I was a kid, my grandmother was already telling me all of those things. So yeah, I'm just so lucky to have found that early.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that confidence is huge. And that's definitely something I think what's really cool about a project like this is as to be able to share these experiences and kind of pass on that confidence to, our next generation and students, to know that they can do whatever they want to do. It doesn't matter where you come from. And okay, so in terms of school, I mean, I know you said that you were super into reading and writing. What were your favorite subjects?
Yeah, honestly, I think maybe part of the weirdness of like deciding that I wanted to be a scientist really early was that I had, on like the one hand, I really like, it was almost non-negotiable to me. Like I had always been like, this is definitely what I'm doing. But then when I was actually in school, like science was by no means my best subject. Like I was always a lot better at the reading and writing and all of that. I was really interested in all of that. I honestly liked it better. Like it's still a kind of weird, like, I guess contrast or dilemma for me. Like I enjoyed the writing and the reading. Like the worst grade I got in high school, honestly, the worst grade I've gotten in my life was the first chemistry class I ever took, honors chemistry, sophomore year of high school. So I very much like there definitely were. I decided that I wanted to be an environmental scientist when I was 8. It was always like, well, I don't know if I should really. Well, okay, no, I'm not going to think about that. Like I'm just going to do all of the things. So in high school, I got really involved in newspaper and political activism. I like interned for the city council for a year or two. I did tons of volunteer work. So I was always interested in science and I thought I wanted to do that. And I took all of the like advanced science classes. But it was not where I was getting like the most the most positive feedback, I would say. Like, so I definitely like really liked newspaper. I really liked writing. I really liked all of that. I was really interested in everything at once. So it was very much, it was kind of confusing, but I finally learned for a while, like I only applied to colleges that had both environmental like studies and environmental science as majors, because I like really wanted to study environmental science, but like just because I had this one like not perfect grade in chemistry, I was like, I don't know, like maybe the science, like I really want to do the science, but like maybe I won't be able to, like maybe I'll lean more in the like policy theory and like my academic studies. So that was like very much like senior year of high school where my mind was at.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to point out is sometimes the things you want to do the most may be challenging for you. But then, that being said, your strong suits in reading and writing and being interested in political activism, I mean, these make you a super well-rounded, not just student, but then somebody who can now be able to effectively communicate science, which is actually quite difficult for a lot of people. And then also, kind of look at more things, maybe like policy, which is also super important. So if you're a good communicator, then, you can transfer your science skill into something that's actually, applicable to so many people. So when you were in high school, where did you decide to apply to school? Did you apply to a bunch of different undergraduate schools, or did you target, I know you said you were looking at places that had environmental science as a major, but kind of what led your search when you were applying?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times being in California, you hear a lot about the UC system. And so I was I always assumed I would apply mostly to UCs and like hopefully get into one. And that was really where my college search was focused. My sister went to UC, and they're such fantastic schools. But then on a whim, I started like very late in the college application process to think a little bit about liberal arts colleges, and that sort of spoke to me because I started looking at like all of the curriculum for like if I were to go to UC and major in a science, it looked like I wouldn't get to do a lot of the things I really liked doing, like the idea of not getting to read and write, which I think now is probably a flaw. Like I think you do get that at UCs. I think I probably like wasn't reading the course listings right or whatever, but I started talking to people at liberal arts colleges and hearing like, oh yeah, you actually like spend a lot of your time like taking random classes. Like you don't need to decide a major right away. You get to do a lot of, you know, different things. So, I did a interview at Scripps College, which is in Claremont. So just, it's like also in a suburb of LA, but it's like an hour and a half away from where I grew up, but because LA is massive. And I did an interview there and I really liked it. So I figured I would apply. So like I applied to, you know, a couple of the Claremont colleges, just still thinking that I would probably go to UC, but I figured I would submit the application. And then I ended up getting in to Scripps, and I got enough financial aid that it would be a similar cost as going to UC. So I was really lucky to like, I mean, college is still really expensive, but at least it wasn't like out off the table going to Scripps. And I just, the more, I was really not sure about it, but the more people I spoke to, it really seemed like a good fit for me to be able to do both of those things, to be able to still write and take a wide variety of classes, but then be able to do science and like start science research really early. There just seemed like there was a lot of cool things about it. Also, Scripps College is a women's college, which was not something I was thinking about at all during my college application process. But at Scripps, it's now really confusing. So now I go to Scripps Institution of Oceanography. But at Scripps College, where I did my undergrad, no relation, except for that they were started by the same woman. Like people usually like high school seniors usually choose to go to Scripps College, like in spite of it being a women's college. They're like, oh, well, whatever, it looks cool, so I'll go, even though I didn't want to go to a women's college. And that was totally me. I was like, well, you know, the college looks cool, so whatever, I'll get used to the fact that it's all women. But I ended up loving it. It was so powerful for me to just be in a space where like it was academic space explicitly focused towards the success of women, and like having constant conversations about like social justice and all of these, really, you know, discussing everything from a gendered point of view and everything, you know, discussing different inequities in society, and just always like having this like critical like kind of society lens on all of these discussions. So it ended up being like just the most incredible decision. But yeah, it was very it was a very fortuitous way things worked out, because I very nearly did not go there.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you made the best decision possible. And that is super, you know, not only just inspiring, but really important. I mean, you know, we're two women in a pretty male dominated, you know, field. And so to be able to actually have such a formative experience and just, you know, be able to talk about things and not be judged or, you know, it's just kind of something that's a safe environment for you to be able to look at just the world and the career path you may want to be going into and what that's going to look like. I also think sometimes, you know, like when you're looking at colleges, well, what about class size or the availability of different kinds of classes? So I think it's important for students to consider all those kinds of things. Or do you want to be far from home? Do you want to be close to home? You know, what are all these different decisions you need to make in a pretty complicated time, which is high school, wherever you're going to school. I think that's all difficult. But wow, yeah, that's really awesome. I've heard great things about that college. So So, and I see from your graphic, you didn't waste any time there. It looks like you did a whole bunch of really cool things. And so in terms of your internships, did you seek them out, or was Scripps College really just good at offering up these kinds of programs? And maybe you can just touch on a couple of the ones that you have highlighted here and just kind of the impact they had on you, and also maybe if they changed the trajectory of your degree at all.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a little bit of both. I think that when you go to a smaller college, it's a little bit easier to start research just because class sizes are so small, and they might have a little bit more, more resources devoted to things like paying undergraduate researchers and things like that. But at the same time, I also applied to everything. Like I was just very much, I spent so many hours writing applications, always sort of with the mindset that like, even if you don't, it was hard, but I eventually got to the mindset of even if I don't get this thing, the practice of writing an application and getting rejected is valuable. So like all of that time is worthwhile. And it absolutely, was very, it helped me figure out what I want to do. And it helped me figure out that I really did want to do research, because like when I went into college, like I thought I wanted to do environmental science, but that's like an incredibly vague term. Like there's so much there. So really early on, I had like an incredible mentor who I'm still really close with today. And she sort of, kindly suggested that I should probably choose one thing and narrow down a bit. So that's what led to me to chemistry, which is really ironic because that was like the class that I like really struggled with the most in high school. So I decided to major in chemistry rather than have this really broad environmental science thing. So then once I like latched on to like, okay, I'm gonna study chemistry as it relates to the environment was basically my mindset. And so then I had that narrowed down and I could apply to a bunch of different things sort of in that, like in that overlapping Venn diagram. So like I was able to study nitrogen in coral. I then moved to a tiny island in the Gulf of Mexico and I studied sediment or mud chemistry there. I was able to study abroad in Panama, which was a really incredible experience. And then I interned with NOAA, which was another whole getting to see the more like government side. So just a lot of different things that sort of just confirmed to me like, okay, I can actually be interested in this, and this is actually the thing that I want to pursue.
I think that's so important. It's like when I started undergrad, I kind of looked at it as the start of my career, because here I am at this, university, college, you have access to all these professors, library, resources. And one of those resources are these amazing internship opportunities. And to actually get to spend time moving around, throughout our country and then throughout the world, the perspective is just so important, as well as shaping what do you want to do. So if you actually get inside of a lab or different experiences, you can figure out not only the things you love doing, but the things you can't see yourself ever doing. And I think those are the most important things. And I really like what you said about kind of getting over applying and then maybe not getting accepted. It's like failure is just not trying. It's not a failure to apply and not get accepted. So you'll eventually get accepted and you'll have an amazing experience. And if it's not an amazing experience, it'll probably definitely shape your life in some positive way.
And every one of these things very much like led to the other. Like there's so many funny little connections, and like even internships that I didn't love ended up like, one of my bosses there ended up giving me a recommendation or knowing someone. And so it's so, now looking back, even the things that like were kind of not pleasant at the time, I'm like, oh, that was so important to this other thing that then I love. So it's all like, it's a circuitous path, but it got there. It all works out in the end.
Oh, for sure. And I think the other thing to point out is although, you know, when I have a degree in chemistry as well. So when I would say that to people, people would kind of think, oh, well, isn't that boring? But look at all the things you did. You studied corals, you studied river systems, you are there snorkeling in Panama, you know, you studied marshes in the Carolinas, like, you know what I mean? So chemistry is just ubiquitous. It's all around us all the time. So that's a super important thing to point out, I think, about the sciences, is that they're really not, they're very broad, each facet, biology, chemistry, geology, you know, there's so many different, you know, niches within each, you know, kind of each discipline, but it's just so wide reaching. Okay, so then you graduated, which is amazing, and then you moved to Spain. What inspired that? That's an amazing experience to have.
Yeah, so when really all through, no, I guess not all through, maybe like a year into college, I had this one, like, you know, one of many existential crises, as one has in college, and I was like I wanted to have something more concrete. Like, science, as cool as it is very abstract. And also, when you're at a liberal arts college taking a bunch of like philosophy classes, it's also really abstract. And I was like, I want to graduate with a thing that I can do. So I really decided to make learning Spanish. And I already could kind of speak Spanish, but it wasn't great. So I decided just to take one Spanish class every semester, which then, you know, helped obviously when I did a field-based study abroad in Panama with like a bunch of different homestays. So it was something I had kind of like gravitated towards, of like, I want to have a thing. I think that especially living in Southern California, it meant a lot to me to be able to communicate with people who might not be that confident in English, or, you know, in different field work. I mean, so much of the country so much of the world, pardon me, speaks Spanish as a native language. I thought that if I could, you know, just increase my confidence in speaking the language, that would be really cool. So I did that, but there's a big difference between being able to like read plays and poetry in Spanish and write essays on it versus being really, really confident in communication. So that I really wanted to, I knew I wanted to start grad school and get a PhD, but I figured if I could spend a little bit more time abroad before doing that, that would have been great. So my senior year of college, I applied to grad school, but I also applied for Fulbright, which is an international exchange program open up to, I believe, US citizens and green card holders, which allows you to either teach or do research abroad for a year. And you basically like come up with a project, you find a mentor, and do this whole application. So I was actually at a conference presenting the research that I had done in Texas the year before. And so, and this was also the summer before my senior year. And just because I'm a very, it's very much my personality, but right before the conference, I looked at the affiliations of every person who was attending the conference, looking for someone who was working in a Spanish-speaking country, so I could go up and like talk to them. So then I found someone who was from Catalonia, his badge said Spain, and then there was a separate mentoring program. So for undergraduates. So I emailed the like director of the mentoring program saying like, hi, can I be paired with this person from Spain? Because I just wanted to like get to speak to him. And it ended up working out. So, you know, I spoke to him at that conference, and then, you know, I explained the Fulbright program to him, and he was like, sure, come on over. So he's great. I mean, he's, you know, still one of my mentors to this day, and the postdoc I worked with them, I'm really close with both of them. So I came up with this whole project, and then I applied to grad school. I ended up getting into Scripps, but then also getting Fulbright. So I just asked Scripps if I could wait a year and do Fulbright, and did that. And it was the best experience. I ended up, there was not a lot of research going into it. So like the whole reason I wanted to go abroad is because I wanted to like get really good at Spanish, but then I ended up living in Girona, Catalonia, which like does not speak Spanish. They speak Catalan. So then I learned Catalan, which was a whole nother fun adventure. And that was really when I like started to feel like a real live scientist. It was the first time I was doing like 40 hours of science a week, like mostly on my own, like my own project. Like I had the reins for a year. So that was super fun.
Yeah, well, I think a huge thing is how resourceful you have been throughout your entire career. Somehow you've known how to just be resourceful enough to figure out where are these people affiliated with. I have this skill set, which is such an awesome skill set to have by being bilingual. And then also being adventurous enough to want to actually pick up and move to another country. And I assume, you were doing that on your own. And I think that's amazing. I mean, being able to not only have a scholarship to go study abroad, but then to know when you come back, you're returning to start a PhD program at a fairly world-renowned institution of oceanography. So when you came back, so in terms of when you were in Spain, were you there alone, or did you go with family? Anybody?
No, I was there alone, but I was really, I was incredibly lucky, and all of this has been made possible by just getting incredibly lucky with not only getting accepted to internships, but also getting incredible mentoring and lab communities along the way. So honestly, when I was in Catalonia, it was incredible. I think the Catalan culture, especially if you try and learn Catalan, I mean, I think it's probably so many cultures around the world, where if you express an interest in speaking the language and learning the culture and being respectful of the culture and like going into everything from a like, I just want to learn perspective, you'll be really welcomed. At least that was my experience in all of the places I've lived.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So now you're here in Scripps Institution of Oceanography is in La Jolla, California. So you're here now in Southern California. And what are you studying now? How have your research interests changed?
Yeah, so also very much sort of speaking to how I've tended to go about things. I think I generally choose like where I want to live, what I want to do, who I want to work with, because I know I'll be interested in anything, for lack of a better term. Like probably not the best thing to say in science, but I really always have been like, you know what, as long as it deals with like climate change, environment, chemistry, I'll be interested in it. So then here at Scripps Oceanography, I bounced around a little bit and I started talking to our advisor, Dick Norris, and I got really interested in the work I was doing here. So it's all paleoclimate focused. I am using a mineral called barite and looking at what this barite can tell us about the climate changes that have occurred in the past. So like thousands and millions of years ago, in order to better predict the climate change we'll have in the future. So it's a really cool sort of project that marries my interest in chemistry and lab work, but also the oceans, but then also this like huge daunting dilemma of climate change. So it's fun. I'm still in the early stages of figuring out exactly what the project will be, but all generally geochemistry themed, but really each of my projects that I've worked on could not have been more different.
And so you have a research vessel on your graphic here. So are your samples oceanographic samples? Have you been out to sea at all?
Yeah. So I just got the chance to go out to sea for my first time in January of this year. So got lucky right before the pandemic. I did a 10-day cruise on the Sally Ride, which is the ship right there. And I filtered a bunch of samples. So we did a CTD cast, which is this huge metal cage that we basically drop really, really deep into the ocean. Our deepest was 4,000 meters, so 12,000 feet deep. And I got some water from the really deep ocean. brought it all back up, filtered it to see all of the barite, all of this mineral called barite on the filters. And now I'm looking at it all under a microscope. So yeah, it was so fun. I can't wait to go back. Like the last day on the boat, I was sort of sad. So now I'm just looking for the next thing to apply to, so I can have some more time on a ship, and just this totally different form of adventure than I had ever done before.
Yep, and just as an aside, so people know, CTD stands for conductivity, temperature, and depth. So it's a really cool instrument that kind of profiles the ocean. And yeah, so yeah, I think something else to point out is oceanographers, those of us who are lucky enough to go out to sea, you go out to sea maybe once a year or once every few years, and in that time frame that you're out on a ship, you're just working pretty much around the clock, collecting samples and information, and then that fuels you for who knows how long when you're back in the lab. So nowadays, like we said, we're a lot of us are still working from home. But when you are in the lab, what kind of lab are you working in, and what specialized tools do you use to see these tiny minerals?
Yeah, so it'll depend on the different projects that I'm doing, but right now I am using a really, really fancy kind of microscope. It's called a scanning electron microscope to get really good pictures of this barite. So we think we know why barite is good for studying climate change, but there's a lot we don't know about it still. So I'm using these pictures to try and figure out what forms barite, why, and why it's important. But then later I'll be doing some more like classical chemistry, more like pouring chemicals together and figuring out how concentrations and some more analysis work. And then maybe depending on the whole coronavirus situation, I might have a modeling chapter, a more computer-based chapter of what we can understand about the oceans and climate change that way.
Yep. Being resourceful nowadays is paramount to our success, I think. Yeah, and I think another thing to point out is that there are just so many more things to discover and find out. So if there's students listening, there is just so much more to learn. So, if you're interested in something, definitely know that there is a place for you in the STEM fields. Okay, so you said you're in your second year, right?
Yeah, or starting my third.
Okay, great. Okay, so I know graduation's a little bit far off and everything's a bit uncertain right now, but what do you think you'll want to do when you graduate? Do you have any idea, or are you just completely open to where the next few years take you?
Yeah, I think more the latter. I think I'm really interested in public policy and things like writing and political advocacy. I've really always been, so interested in that. So maybe working in some sort of governmental institution, but I also love research. So I think I would be happy doing a lot of different things, and I will probably narrow that down later. I also like the idea of teaching. I haven't taught yet, but it's on my to-do list. So yeah, just keeping my options open for now.
Well, I think you'd be a very powerful voice as an advocate in a government position. So I think that is something that we need more of. Somebody who communicates well, writes well, is very, very strong. But that being said, you should also continue your passion for research, but definitely then pass all this on through teaching and inspire other people to. Okay, so to shift a little bit, so what do you like to do when you're not working? Although, you work a lot as a graduate student. When you do have free time, what kind of things do you like to do?
When I do have free time, I think I end up spending a lot of my free time on like committees and things like that. I think that as scientists, you mentioned earlier that there's not that many women in our field, but also even more so, I have incredible amounts of privilege as a white woman in the sciences, and really just trying to work towards making science more truly inclusive of everyone, and promoting more diversity in the workforce. So and also things like environmental justice, and pushing our campus to be a little bit more forward thinking on things like climate change and emissions. And I find a lot of that work really rewarding. So I end up spending a lot of my time doing that just because it makes me so much more hopeful towards the future. So I'd say a lot of my time ends up going towards that, but I also do think it's really important to not be working all of the time. So when I'm not, I love backpacking. I love hiking. That's sort of always my every break I get, I will generally be in nature in some way, climbing. I play volleyball and I climb. So just all of that whenever I do get some free time.
Yeah, I think nature is really a grounding force for a lot of us. And yeah, striking that balance, I think that's always important. I think it's hard as a student to strike that balance, but it is important to care for yourself so you have that energy to do all this awesome work you're doing. And yeah, I think it's really inspiring. I feel like, getting to kids when they're really, really young, letting them know what possibilities are there and really supporting education for everybody. I think that's super important. So yeah, the work you're doing both inside and outside of the lab is definitely inspiring. And so I think I just kind of maybe wrap up with a couple of questions about, if you, looking back, if you could tell yourself anytime between kindergarten and undergraduate, something you struggled with, if you could tell yourself anything with the perspective you have today, what would that be?
I think it would be not to worry about the straight line, because whatever you think you should be doing, I think that basically any experience will teach you something, and you need a lot of different skill sets and a lot of different careers and categories. So like if you're really, like me, I was really interested in writing, and I definitely remember like, oh, maybe I should be doing something else right now. But I mean, I learned so much through that, and different, volunteer orgs and things like that. So like, if you're interested in it, just do it, and don't worry about the straight line. Like right now, looking back with my like longish term experience, I'm like, oh wait, no, that was super valuable, because now like probably my biggest asset as a scientist is the fact that I'm a confident writer and things like that. And like, oh, why did I spend like years studying like Spanish instead of like taking a computer science class, which I never did, which now I kind of do wish I had taken that computer science class, but still, learning Spanish allowed me to move to Spain and Catalonia and do all of this cool research. So like, just do whatever you're interested in and what's exciting to you in that moment, and it'll serve something. And it's okay if that line like isn't straight.
Yeah, that's really great advice. I mean, even your visual just kind of shows that winding road, which I think is so typical to a lot of people's experience. And so one last question. So what would you tell, students now, if you could give students of any age, it's pretty applicable, but if you could give any advice, what would that be from where you are right now?
I think just whatever path you want to do will work out. Like I think that I went to Scripps College and I studied chemistry and it was great, but I think I would have also been really happy and been being really productive somewhere else. And all of these decisions, while each decision does have a big impact, that doesn't mean that there's like right and wrong decisions. And I think that as long as you're doing something you're interested in, like it'll all work out. Like you have a lot of different reasons, and like none of them are more valid or less valid. Just like do whatever you want. And if you're interested in something like science, just study science, but also study things that aren't science, and do whatever makes you happy in the moment. Because I think a lot of that will end up working out. Like honestly, like I have done all of these cool internships and everything, but like I also just really hate cold weather. Like that was not an insignificant driving factor. I'm like, well, I'm only applying to like anything as long as it's like gonna be sunny most of the time, or like things like that, where it's like you never hear in like these official like versions of events. Yet it worked out for me, and I like still haven't really had to live in a cold place. So
That's such an important point. I think that, you know, jumping on any opportunity that comes your way is a good thing, but you really have to know yourself. So that's really important. And you said it before, you know, you need to know where you want to live, who you're comfortable working with and working for, and the situation you're going to be in. So those are all really, really important. And yeah, I mean, you know, all life is always just going to bring you so many opportunities to make decisions. So if you make one decision and you go for something like an internship or even a degree and you're not happy with it, you can always pivot and try something different. So that's such good advice, and it's worked pretty well for you, and I'm sure it will continue to as you move forward with your career. Yeah. Okay, so is there anything else I missed that you want to mention or talk about?
thank you. I think you hit it all.
Awesome. Well, I am definitely much more inspired than I was before I spoke with you today. I thank you so much for being willing to put together a visual and do an interview and share your really awesome story, you know, with everybody who's going to be able to listen to this.
Oh, for sure. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't really have people to look to ask about all of these paths. So I wish I had had access to this really cool project when I was in high school.
Well, here's hoping it reaches lots of students, and I know your story will be very, very much inspiring to a lot of different kinds of people. So, okay, well, with that being said, thank you so much, Tricia, and I think we'll say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. How do I I'm gonna have to edit this out.